Right, hello to everyone who's decided to join this class. Today we're going to be doing dynamic objects. I've decided to do this class based on a request from some of the students that have said that they're struggling with dynamic objects. Right, so I'll try and do a quick rundown, hopefully not too long and also not too complex. Right, so firstly we need to obviously start off a form and we need to go and save this particular application. So I'm just going to save this one onto the desktop for now. And let's go create a folder over here, which will just be dynamic objects. I'm not going to name this stuff. I'm just going to save it directly in over there. Right, and now I need to go and put an image into this folder because the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to load an image onto the form. So we'll do it as basic as possible. Then we can load some of the other components, and then we can probably try and play around with buttons, because buttons are probably the most difficult thing to do as dynamic objects. Right, so I need to go and put this image into the same folder. So let's just go do it. I've got an image on the desktop here, which is called computer.jpg. So I'm just going to cut it out and paste it into this folder over here. Right, now the way you should be doing this is you should always have an image folder inside of your program. So let's create it, images. And then I'm going to put that particular picture into that folder. All right. So now we're back here. And the idea is that we want to go and add an actual image onto the form. Doesn't really matter where we add it for now, but let's just go and get it onto the form. So the rules about dynamic objects are very similar to that of object orientation, which you would learn in grade 12. So if you understand object orientation, dynamic objects become really easy. Or if you understand dynamic objects, then your object orientation becomes a lot easier to work with. Right, so the very first thing that we need to do is we need to go and put memory space for this particular image. Right, so we're trying to find an image in this list over here. We want to put it down there, but we don't want to use the tool palette. We want to do this with code. So the very first thing that you need to do is to go into the top. I'm just going to zoom this in so you can see. So you go to the top over here and you go and add in memory space. So we're going to call it img. Computer is of type T image. Right. So in object orientation, you have units that contain classes. And the class is the thing that contains all of the code as to how an image gets created. So in other words, what its properties are, as well as what it can do from a behavior side. Right, so we said we're going to create a single image over here, which is called img computer, and we want it to be based on the class TImage. Now, the first thing we have over here is that we have an undeclared identifier. This is where most people just stop working because they don't actually know what's going on here. Right, now the issue is inside the uses section up here at the top, you need to go and add the actual unit that contains the TImage. Right, now, if you don't know where this TImage comes from, what you could do is you could go back to the design view. You can then go and search for an image over here. Right, and now if you hover over this image, it will tell you that it exists in external controls. So if you hover over there, you can see VCL external controls. Right, now I am using RAD 10.4, so I actually have to go and add in the VCL.external controls. If you're using the older version of Delphi, being the 2010, you just need to write external controls. Right, so go back here. You'll see that if you come in, you'll go VCL.external controls, and there it is. Now, if you didn't have the new version of Delphi, you would just type in external controls like that. But mine is VCL.external controls. I might have a failure over here because I actually put the image on the form, which means that it might have already put that thing in for me. So if I go through here, let's see. No, it doesn't. Right, so we have it correct, VCL, external controls, and now you can see that this TImage is not failing anymore. Okay, so the very first thing that you need to do for object orientation is to always put your uses links at the top. Right, so we've got that. Second thing that you need to do is go and create memory space for your particular object to go. That we have done. The third thing is to go and create the actual object itself. Right, so we want this thing to create when the form starts running. So I'm going to use form create over here. And I am going to write img computer is assigned t image dot create. Right now, if this dot comes up and you see the create option, then you know that you've done things correct as the first two steps over here. The link to the actual unit as well as memory space. Right, so the reason why I put it in the memory space up here is because I want this thing to be active for the entire form. Right now, the reason why I've made it private is because if I add another form into this particular program, only this form one will be able to see the likes of the object over here, img computer. If you put it into the public section, the other form will be able to actually see that img computer and will be able to make changes to it. So we leave it in the private section. Right, so if we've got this, we can say dot create. Now it's going to say, what is your form owner? Who's going to actually take ownership to this particular object? Right, now if I look at this particular thing first, I've skipped a step and I haven't actually gone and named my form. So my form should be the correct name. So let's go do that quickly. I'm going to go onto the form, go to name, and we'll go frm computer. Right, I've got a name. I haven't changed the caption. We can change the caption on the code section. So let's do that quickly. frm computer dot caption is assigned computer, and then frm computer dot position go screen center. So here is where we're going to create the dynamic object being the image. Right, so we're going to put this thing onto frm computer. It's basically we're saying the object name. This is very important, particularly also when you guys are going to be doing object orientation in grade 12. It is the object's name is being created out of the class's name. So if you had to look at this as a real world scenario, if you've got a recipe to bake a cake, this would be the recipe over here. This would be the actual cake, right? So you're basically taking all the ingredients as well as the recipe, and you're making your cake based on the rules of how that recipe works. Right, so if we reiterate what's happened in the beginning, we have to link to the actual unit that stores the class's details. So think of this as if you were in the kitchen and you had to have that recipe. This would be your recipe book, where you have a whole bunch of different recipes. Then we need to go and create memory space. So in other words, over here, what's happening is you're basically making space in the kitchen for you to be able to make this item, aka chocolate cake. Right, the recipe over here would be the chocolate cake. That would be the space as well as all the ingredients. Now we want to go and create this particular item. So we say the actual cake has been created from the recipe using all of the ingredients. Right. But we also have to say that this particular object has a parent, because this is being created on the form. The parent to this object is going to be the form itself. Right. I always like to write it up like this, where I know that I've put image computer is that, and image computer parent is that. Now we can use the with command, which helps because then we don't have to write image computer out every time. So we go with image computer do in and end. Right, so now what you can do is you can go and give this particular image its properties. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set its top property. So let's say we want to put it in the top left corner. So we'll go 50, left is 50, right? We can decide how big we want this image. So we can say the height of this image is going to be, let's say 300 pixels, and the width of the image is going to be maybe 500 pixels. Right, so if we run the particular application now, what you'll see is that we have no errors, right? So all our code for creating this dynamic object is working. The issue is that we haven't actually put an image into this particular image object. So that's why we don't see anything. Right, so to load the image, we'll go picture.load from file, and then we'll put the actual image name in. So this is images. Then it's going to be computer.jpg. The file type is obviously very important over here. So if I go to the open, there's my images folder. I can double click in there and you see that nothing's been found. But if I open this and say any file, what will happen is I can see it says computer.jpg. Right, so if you hover over it, if you don't see the JPEG here, it means your extensions viewing option is not on. But if you hover over the file, you'll see that it is a JPEG file. That's very important because if you get the wrong file type, this picture won't load. I'll give you an example of what happens. Right, so we've got that. Now, see if I run the program. Now it tells me that there's an unknown picture file extension JPEG, which means that maybe I've gotten the actual folder wrong. Right, so let me try it like that. Still says unknown picture file type. Right, now this is where people start panicking because yes, my picture is a JPEG, right? We've confirmed that by going and have a look at the actual images itself. Right, so we go back there to all files. It's definitely JPEG. So why is it failing? Right, so for Delphi to be able to read a JPEG image, you actually have to go and add the uses section as to how JPEG images are controlled. So that means up here at the top again, you need to add in JPEG. So JPEG is there. Now you can see it's here as well. We run it. Now it says to me, wait a second, I can't find this particular image over here because the actual folder structure is incorrect. Right, now if we have a look at the folder structure over here, it's going to dynamic objects 132 debug images computer. So it's actually going into the debug folder. Right, so Delphi 10.4 actually makes use of this 132 debug folder and not the default folder that 2010 used. So if I go back to the thing over here, this is where the normal Delphi 2010 would have saved its actual exe. But 10.4 saves it in this 132 debug folder, and there's the actual exe there. So that means that we have to come back here and take our images folder, cut it out, and paste it into here. Right, so now that image folder is inside of the same exe document, and it should load now. There it is. Okay, so some things to note first is my form is not big enough, right? Because it doesn't fit the actual image in. So I'll need to make my form bigger, which we can do up here. No, not there, sorry, other form stuff. So I'm going to go frm computer dot width. It's 800. Frame computer dot height is 600. Right, now if I run it, you will see that my form is big enough and we have an image that's loaded here. Right, now I specifically went and got a very large image because I want you to see that there are other rules at play over here with regards to the image. So the image is here, but it doesn't look like a computer. And the reason for that is because if I open the image over here, because the image is so big, I'm actually only seeing that area over there. Right, so what we can do to get this image to actually work on Delphi is to go and stretch the item to true. So we're going to come in here, we're going to say the stretch property must be signed to true. Now the image fits in. Right, so another thing that you can do over here is if you had the dimensions wrong, so let's make this one the full 800. You'll see that the image will be very, very flat and very stretched out. So there is an option to add proportional as well. If you put proportional in, you can see that your image now sets to the right size. Right, so when you're doing images, I would suggest that you always set the size of the image that you want. You then go and load the image. You add the stretch property as well as the proportional property. Okay, so other things to note over here is if you get the wrong file type, so in other words, if I typed in PNG over here and I pushed run, first thing I'm going to get is the unknown picture file extension being PNG. So if it was a PNG file, all that you need to do is come up to the top over here and add PNG image. Right, so this is post-network graphics image, and it will now work. So if I run it, you see I don't get that PNG image anymore, but I get this message that says I can't find the computer.png. And that's why I said to you it's very important to make sure what is your actual file type of your image. So if I had to go into this folder and I had to go and put in a PNG image over there, then it will load in Delphi. Right. If you're using RAD 10 or if you're using Delphi 2010, PNG images are accessible, but if you're using a version before that, you can't use a PNG image. Only JPEG and bitmap images work. All right. So if we go over these steps again, there's 5 basic steps that you need to do. The first one is to go and link your units where these systems reside. Right, the second one is to go and create memory space for it. Right, so it's the actual object that you want that comes out of the class. And then you can go and create your item. So over here, I've decided to create an actual object that must be created out of the class's rules. I've decided to make the form the parent of this particular object, and then we set up the properties of this particular item, which is top, left, height, width, stretch, and proportional. Right, now there is one extra step which involves any form of behavioral aspects. Right, so this particular image doesn't have a behavioral aspect because there's no events attached to it. Right, so a button will have that. So what I'm going to do, just so we can reiterate and get your memory going, we'll put a label in, we'll put in a panel, and then we'll put something into the panel, and then we'll do a button right at the end. Right, so if we want to do a label, let's come up here to the top and add a label. So we're going to go LBL, greeting. Let's make it heading. So we can do a heading for the computer. LBL heading. T label. Right. Now, does T label work? No, it does not work, because what happens over here is the user section, which was step 1, doesn't exist in any one of these uses up here. Right. So in other words, it can't find the label. So what do? We go to the design, we look at label, we hover over here, and we can see that it comes out of the standard controls. So standard controls. Okay, so going back into here, I'm just going to add in PCL.standard controls. Now, if you didn't have RAD 10.4, you would just enter standard controls. Right, so I've got the standard controls. And notice now that this thing is not failing anymore. Right, so labels are really, really easy to do. So let's go down here to the bottom. We've created the code for the image. Now what I want to do is I want to go and create the code for the label. So create the dynamic object label. Okay, so the same rules apply here. It is the label's object name, which is LBL heading, is assigned key label create. Now remember, like I said the last time, if you see this little create option open, then it means your step 1 of the user section, your step 2 of creating memory space has been done correctly. Right, so we create the item and then we put it onto the form. Right, so it is FRM computer. Then we're going to have an LBL heading dot parent. We want the form to be the parent, so it's FRM computer, and we're done. Now we have to set the object up using the with command. So with LBL heading to in end. What we need to do over here is we need to specify where this item is going to reside. So the top value over here needs to be higher than what the image was. So this will then be something like 30 pixels. The left needs to be the same as the image, so that was 50 pixels. We don't need to specify the height or the width because it will create itself automatically, but we might decide we want to go and specify certain font options. So let's say the font.name is going to equal to Verdana. Font.size. This is a big heading, so we need to be something like 14 points. Font.style is FS bold. Right. Now the only thing we're missing is the actual caption for this heading. So if I go and run this, what do we see? Right. This little error over here is a new error from RAD 10.4. If your program is still running, then it will not be able to create a new output file. So I need to go and close this and then rerun it. Right, so I didn't go and change the code for computer.png. It's supposed to be computer.jpg. Try and read your error messages because they'll tell you kind of exactly what is happening. So it's definitely a PNG, so I need to come up here to the top and change that back to JPEG. Rerun. And there is our image, but there's no label sitting over here. Right, now the reason why there's no label sitting over there is simply because of the fact that we haven't put down the caption. So if we come here and write caption, computers are awesome. There it is. Now we might want to go and make some changes to this because you can see that this height isn't the correct height. We might want it to come up a bit, we might want it to be a bit bigger, and maybe you might want to center it in that particular image over there. Right, so my suggestion over here is to get your width over here correct. So if I make that 500 on the image, right, so that looks good. So what I can do over here is I can say, let's force the width property of our label to be the same size as the image. Now, you don't want to always work with stock numbers over here. You can come in here and write img computer.width. But that means that if you go and change the width of your image, it will automatically update the width of the heading as well. Right, the top needs to be less, so I'm going to make that 20. The size, I'm going to make that 16. Now have a look at it, what it looks like now. Right, it looks a bit better, but maybe I can move this up a bit more. So I'll drop this down to 10. That's fine. What happens if we want this thing in the center? Now what I've done is I've said the left property is the same as the left property over here. If you want to make sure it's the same, again, you can write img computer.left. Right, so that means that if I had to move the img, the label will move with it. So have a look here. I'm going to take the left over here and I'm going to make it 200. Do you see that the label moves with the image? And that's kind of what we want. We want to have code that adapts every single time, but you don't have to go and change options everywhere. Right, so I'm going to bring this back to 50. And then there's a little property over here which allows you to align your text. Right, now, if you didn't know this, go to your design, look at a label. Right, so I'm just going to drop a label on the form over there. Right, and have a look at the properties of this label. And see if there's something that allows you to align this thing somehow different. And you see over there that there is a TA center, a TA left justified, and a TA right. So it's under the alignment option. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this label out here, go back to my code, and I'm going to write alignment is equal to TA center. Right, now, if we run it, notice that it didn't actually go and make a change over here. The reason why that happens is because there's an auto size value set onto all labels. So if I go back here, put another label back on, you'll see that there is a thing called auto size. There it is there. So we have to set that to false. Right, back to the code. Now before we go and set the width, we have to come in here and say LBL heading dot auto size. I don't really have to write heading because it's already up there. So just auto size is false. I run it. Do you see that it's now in the center? So it's actually perfectly in the center. The problem now is the auto size is incorrect to the size of my font, so I actually have to make the height bigger. So we're going to go here, I'm going to say height is assigned maybe 40 pixels. You see now it fits perfectly. And the really awesome part about this thing is if we go and make a change to our image, the label will float with it. So we go back up here, and remember I said to you if I go and change the left property to 200, there the image is moved and the actual heading is moved with it. Right. So that's one little thing in a nutshell. What happens if you want to go and use something like a panel and then put an object into that panel? Right, so I'm just going to make my form a bit bigger. So we want to do something like that. So if we have a look at our code, are we happy with 800 by 600? Not really. You see, it's not going to fit in somewhere over here. So I'm going to increase my width to maybe 1,000, 200, and then make that one 800. Right, so now I have some more space to go and put a panel in over there. Right, so panels. We want to stick to the same rules of rule number 1, uses section. Rule number 2 is memory space. So let's go and write rule number 2 in, which is PNL. Let's go and put some stuff on there. So let's say PNL info, and it is coming out of the class tPanel. At the moment, tPanel is not failing, which means that it comes out of the external controls. So if I hover over there, you see it says external controls, which I went and added right in the beginning of the lesson there. Okay, so that definitely works. So the same rules apply. We want to go and add this panel. So step number 3 is create the panel. Object panel. Okay, so it is PNL info is assigned tPanel.create. And like I said previously, if you see this option pop up, it means you're doing the stuff correctly because it finds that option. Right, we are going to put the panel onto the form. So FRM, computer. The panel's parent is going to be the form. Right, FRM, computer. Okay. Right, so the with command. What do we want this panel to do? Right, so we want to go and put this panel next to where the image is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the top value of this thing must equal to img computer.top. The left of this item must equal to img computer dot left, whoopsie, great, left plus img computer dot width plus maybe an extra 50 pixels. The height of this thing can equal to img computer dot height. The width can be the same as the image. You can make it a manual one, but I'm going to do it the same as the image. So if the image changes in size, then our panel will automatically change in size as well. Right, so if I run it now, you will see that we have the panel, and it's pretty much the same size as our image. The reason why the image looks a bit smaller over here is because of the fact that we've got that proportional value on it. So if I make my width a bit bigger, let's say we make that 600, you'll see that the two match quite nicely. But that gap there is a bit too much, so I can reduce that gap if I want to. Otherwise, I can increase the size of my form. Right, so I'm just going to reduce this by 300 pixels, and I'm going to move the left, not by 30, just like that. You see that I've made it too small. That gap is nice compared to that gap, but this one needs to be a little bit bigger. So all I'm going to do is reduce that one by 150 though, and we should have the exact same size. Here we go. Right, so we're going to put a label inside here, and then we are going to put a button on there. Right, so the panel is now going to be the parent. So to put a label in, let's go up to the top. Is the uses section there? Yes, because labels reside out of standard control. Let's go and add our memory space, which is going to be LBL. Panel is T label. Let's go panel heading, so that you know. So LBL panel heading is a T label. Now the important part over here is because this is going to be a child and the panel is going to be a parent, you can only create this object after the panel has been created. Right, so you can't create this panel first because it won't be able to find where it needs to go. So I'm going to go right down to the bottom, and we're going to create this item. So we're going to go dynamic. Let's say panel label. So the first step was name is assigned label dot. You should see the create pop-up, which it is there. Enter. And now you can say the owner of this thing is still the form, computer. Right, so the actual form owns all of the objects. The parent to this item is the panel. Right, now have I named this thing incorrectly? It's panel heading. Sorry, I went and said panel label. Now notice you can always see these things over here as well. So there it is, panel heading. So I need to change this to heading. Right. Now, this is where the parent option comes in. Parent, and we're going to make the parent PNL info, not FRM computer, because we want this panel to be, sorry, this label to be inside of the panel. Right, now there's new rules about how this thing resides, because if I say with PNL LBL panel heading, the top and the left position is not going to be 0, 0 over there. Let me just run the program and you can explain better. So 0, 0 is sitting over there. So that means that if I want to put the label over here, it looks like I need to move 800 pixels to the side and probably about 30 pixels to the bottom. So if I go and put the label into 0, 0, you would think that it's going to sit over there, but it's not, because what happens is this is the actual panel. It's got boundaries for it, and if you put something on this panel and make it the parent and you say 0, 0, we'll go and put the label over there. Right, so let's show you what I mean. PNL dot top is 0, the left is 0, and then the caption value is see what I mean. See, there it is. Now, if I made this form and I run it, you will see now that it jumps to the forms 0, 0. Okay, so it's very important to know who is the owner of this particular item, and the owner is definitely the panel. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back onto the panel, PNL info. You'll see that the label will go there. Now, another interesting to note is if I go and say PNL info dot visible is false, because this label is a child of the PNL info. Whatever PNL info does, this label has to do as well. So if this thing goes invisible, then this will become invisible as well. So you'll see now, panel's not there and neither is the label there. But if I put this back onto FRM computer, you'll see that the panel has disappeared, but the label is still there. Right, so I hope you see what the parent option is all about. Right, so I'm going to take it back to PLL info as the parent. Right, now, what happens if I want to go and put this label into the center of that particular panel? Right, so a little bit of maths is involved here, but it's not all too difficult. So the first thing is to obviously go and say the auto size of this label is set to false. So we're going to say over here, auto size is false. Then what we need to do is we need to set the width of this label to being the same size as the panel's width. So we go width is assigned to PNL info dot width. We then go and say that the alignment option is TA center. Right, and now what happens is if I run it, we should be in the center. Right, I can move it down a bit and change the font, labels, etc. So that would be something like font size 14, font dot style bold, and then font name. Let's do like terminal. And we need to move the top a bit. So we're going to say over here, we want this thing to maybe be 20 pixels down. Right, so if we run it, you should see a nice heading in the center over there. Right, now you could have done this with maths as well. So what I did was I used the alignment options over there. So I could have said, leave that one out, right? Leave this one out and leave that one out. What we do now is we say that the left property can only be assigned after we do the caption. So the size has been set by that, but we also can't do it there until we know the size of the entire font group. So this should actually be here at the top. So we specify how big we want this thing to be. Then it writes this, and then it gets the width property of this label. And now if I say take PNL info dot width div 2, okay, we put that into there, right? And then we say that the label's width must also be div 2. LBL, we already got it. We'll go dot width div 2. Now you see it's still in the center, because what I did was I set the size of the label with regards to its font size, with regards to its width, because the auto size is now on. It decides how big it needs to be. I've put in the caption over here, and then I've said the left property is equal to the panel's width divided by 2 minus the width of the label divided by 2. So if I just write C, it will be in the middle. If I write a whole bunch of stuff, stay in the middle. So you can choose whether you like this method, which is the div method, or whether you like this method, which is the alignment method, where you basically take auto size off, you then set the width, and then you set the alignment to center. It will be the exact same result. Okay. Right, so let's go and put a button on the form, because the buttons are probably the most difficult ones to do. But I'm not going to put it on the form. I'm going to put it into the panel so you can see that the button will create inside of the panel. Right, so the first step is to know where does the button reside in which unit. Right, it should be in standard controls. So let's try btn panel click is, or let's just say panel, btn panel. And this is a T button. Right, now if I hover over T button, you can see that it comes out of standard controls, which we've already written up there. So we're quite happy for it to be there. Right? First step, uses in. Second step, memory space. Third step is to go and create the button, which will be down here. Dynamic button. Right, so btn panel is assigned T button dot. You should see the create option there. Yes, there it is. It's going on to the form computer because the form owns all of the objects. And then we're going to say btn panel dot parent. We want the parent to be the panel. So it's PNL info as the parent. Now with btn panel, we want its caption to equal to okay, the top I'm going to set to where the label was and then go and add an extra like 20 pixels or so. So we're going to say to the LBL panel heading at top plus, let's say 100 pixels. Now I'll tell you why I've done that, because once we've displayed it, you'll see that if I go and move this top value, the button will move as well. Okay, I forgot to do a begin, so there's the begin. Right, and now we're going to add in, we got top, we got width, the left will be the center as well. So I'm just going to use this option here. PNL info, dot width div 2 minus the button's width div 2. Okay, so if I run it, we should see our button over there. There it is. Notice that it is not wide enough, so I need to make it wider. I also need to make it a bit higher, and this gap is too much. So I need to come back here and say that the top value shouldn't be 100. Let's increase it maybe by 20. But the width is definitely not big enough, so let's make that 160. So form color sky blue fits in. Maybe the font is a little bit small, so we can make that bigger with the font stuff, but I don't want to waste too much time, so let's leave it as it is, move it down a bit. So this top over here, let's make that 50 pixels. So that looks good. Now notice that if I move my top of the actual label, let's make that 100, notice that the button will move with it. See? So that's why we need to write our code that we're always making use of the previous object, so that if you move one object, this will move with it. The same as even if I go and move the actual panel now, because these two items, parents, are the panel, if I decide to go and move this, there we go, that is the computer, sorry, that is there. Here's the panel here. So if I say the top here plus 300, all of the items inside that panel move with the panel because that's the parent. Right, so I'm just going to take this out quickly and show you how to do the actual buttons click property. Okay, so there's a thing called onClick. Now the onClick property needs a procedure to control how the onClick works. So to explain this, if I come back here and I do the button, right, let's go and have a look at the code. We've got button 1 over there. Go to the top here, you'll see that the user section is there, and they've gone and created memory space button 1 type T button. Right. When you guys create dynamic objects, you have to put it into either private or into public. For some other reason, it doesn't seem to like being placed up there. Right, so there's their code. Now, when I double click on this button, look what happens. I get a procedure called button 1 click. And the procedure will get written over here, button 1 click. Right, so we have to simulate the same thing when we're doing code. Right, so I'm going to delete this button. Right, so go back to the code over here. You will see that that thing has disappeared, but this thing still stays here. Now, if you run, what you'll see is it will actually go and get rid of that particular method. It's not there anymore. Right, so that's the correct way of doing things. Right, so here by the button, we need to have a procedure. So let's call this button BTN panel click. Right, so now we have to go and write a method so that this thing can actually go and call that particular method over there. Right, so up here, you're going to write procedure BTN panel click, and you're going to open up a bracket and you're going to write sender is T object. Right, so basically what happens over here is all the rules about how Delphi deals with objects is stored in the class called T object. And what we're going to do is we're going to send the clickable status of our button to this particular procedure. So when you click on the button, it says, hey, a button on click has been initiated. Go to BTN panel click. And it goes through there using this on-click status there. Right, so we just have the heading for procedure button. We don't actually have the code. So it's a Control-Shift-C. There is the code, and we have to write something like FRM color computer dot color is assigned CL sky blue. Now you'll see if I run the program, we have a button, and now when we click on the button, it changes the color. Because the panel is a child of the parent, the panel's color will change based on the parent color of the form. Right, so let me just reiterate. When you get to a button, you have to use the on-click status. So to be able to get it to on-click, you have to write a procedure's name over here, which is BTN panel click in this case. Right here at the top, I've created the procedure, which was BTN panel click. Very important, sender is of type T object. When you go and Control-Shift-C, it will go and create the code for you to write your normal button code over there. Right, so that is the end of the lesson. Unfortunately, I have to run because I've got a class starting now. So if you do require any more of these types of videos, let me know and I can make them for you.